Hey guys, welcome back to Bamboco Boards. Duncan here. I'm with Thomas from the Rolling Fix.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey Thomas. And in this video, he's just going to quickly show us an introduction on how to set your shocks front and back for the Super73 RX. We'll do a more in-depth video for like a really, technical things and how to service them later in this week or in this month. But right now, it's just probably all you should know when you receive your bike and if you want to have it set up for yourself. All right, let's get into it.
Hey guys, thanks for that, Duncan. As Duncan said, we're going to run you through how to set your suspension up on your new Super 73. So these bikes have like an air fork on the front and then a spring on the back. So up here, we can actually put some air in the fork to control how much it compresses and how hard it is to compress. And the equivalent of that on the back here is that we've got a spring. So the spring acts as the air suspension or as the resistance you have. So we're just going to go ahead and do the front first and then we'll move our way to the back. The reason why you want to set your suspension up properly is that it will run, as it's designed for your body and the way you ride as well. If you just run them stock standard, they're generally not going to feel as smooth and as fluid. And with proper suspension like this, if you set it up properly, the bike's going to be a lot smoother and really react properly as you're taking it, just around the street or if you are going off-road. So this is a shock pump and we're going to use this to put air into the bike. It runs off a basic Schrader valve, but the important thing is that you need a specific shock pump because as this pushes air in, it only does in a very small amount for each pump, because if you use a normal pump, the amount of air you push into it is greater than the reservoir has. And to accompany that, we've got our manual here and we've got a suggested amount of air pressure we're going to put into the bike. So we're going to go to kilos. There's 75 and 84. I'm about 80 kilos. So the PSI is between 110 and 115. So I generally prefer to run my suspension a little bit softer. So I'm going to run it at about 110, 112. And they've got bar in here and also pounds. So drop that down. And then underneath here, there's just a little screw down here. Little cap, take that off. And then we're going to pop this on. All right, so just come up now and you can see the air pressure in here. We're just below 100 at about 90. So I'm just going to pump this up. We're at 100, 110. So I'm just going to leave it there. Take this off, put the cap back on. Make sure this is nice and tight because otherwise it might fall off as you're riding. It doesn't actually stop any air coming out, but it does stop a lot of dirt and grime getting up into the valve. Just look over here, Duncan. We've got a little O-ring here. So this O-ring, we're going to measure it based on the settings that the manual had. Theoretically, if I sit on this, try and do it without dropping the suspension down. You can just grab a chair or your friend can help you. You should be able to sit here. And actually, Omar. Hey, Omar!
Yo!
Give us a hand. Can you hold the front of the bike here, 2 hands? I'm going to stand up as if I'm riding the bike. All right, you ready? I'm going to compress the suspension, then I'm going to try and get off without dropping the suspension anymore. And then theoretically, if I come down here, this should be about 20 millimeters. So it's a bit more. We're at 30, but this is at, or 20% generally is, you want to have about 20 to 30% of the suspension. So if you can go all the way down here, we're at about 20 to 30%. So I think that's good. And the reason why you want that compressed is that if you go over a hole, you want the suspension to drop down into the hole. Or if you go off a little drop, you want the suspension to drop down and push into the hole. If it's too pumped up, it's always at the top and you can only ever compress when you hit something that comes up. So that's done. The next step is to do the rebound, and that's over here on this little red dial. We've got fast and slow, and we want to control this is controlling the speed at which the fork rebounds or comes back up into you. So if it's really fast, we'll go all the way to the fast side. There's quite a lot of clicks here, so it's all the way over. And as I push this down, it comes back really fast. So it really wants to push back out. So it's essentially a spring with nothing slowing it down. If we go to the slower side, I'll go all the way just to exaggerate. As I push down, it's a bit slower to come down, but it's also a lot slower to come back up. So we want to find a nice balance so that as we're riding along, if you hit a bump or if you compress the suspension, so it could be you land off a jump or you go through like a compression in the road, that the bike doesn't kick you back out, because if there's too much spring, it kind of throws you off like a pogo stick. So a good way to test this is if you lift the bike up and drop it and there's no response. So maybe a little bit faster. Another way you can do it is if you compress it, that it kind of comes up the same speed that your hands would. So that's good. And then the only other option to play around with is your preload. So the preload, it somewhat acts like the air pressure. So we've got soft and hard. I generally run this pretty soft. This means this is like your low speed bumps. So as you're riding along and you got, like, if you ride over a stick or something like that, this allows the suspension to engage faster. If this is really hard, it needs more of a bump for the suspension to work. So the softer it is, the easier it is for your suspension to engage. My suggestion is start it off pretty soft, and then if you find that it is compressing all the time, then you can move your way to the harder side. So just to recap, we've done our air pressure in our fork. We've taken the measurements from the manual. If not, you can use a ruler and get to about 20% of the compression. We've done our rebound, which controls how fast the fork bounces back from a compression. And then we've got the preload here as well, which controls how much pressure or energy it takes to engage the fork into moving. So once this is set up, the bike's going to feel a lot nicer, and the suspension is going to feel nice and smooth.
Hey, what if you wanted to go hardcore off-road riding?
Well, generally, if you set the suspension up like we've just done there, it's pretty much going to be good for most of your riding. If you are going to be jumping off bigger things, the thing you want to avoid is bottoming out the suspension. So you may want to add more air to the fork, and you'll feel that if you compress the bike, as it goes through the suspension, it'll hit like a wall where it will actually fully compress. You don't really want to be doing that too often. It naturally does happen when the suspension's set up right, but if you're going to be jumping off big things, and just put a bit more air in your fork. If you do put more air in, then you've got to increase the amount of rebound, because it'll be more of a pogo stick. So general rule of thumb is like more air, like more rebound, because otherwise it just bounces too much. So so now that we've done the front, it's important to do the rear as well. These suspension systems work in unison, and what people sometimes do is actually do the rear and then the front and then the rear and the front, and they go back and forth because the amount of sag changes depending on the amount of sag you have at the rear. So we'll do the rear now. It's a lot easier. There's no air in this one. So first thing we're going to do is wind this most of the way out. Like at the moment it's quite loose, so it's too far out. There's a little ring you can tighten down here. Just want a little bit of pressure, not too much. And then once it's under pressure a little bit, we're just going to jump on the bike. We're going to measure the sag again. So sit down and get all your weight on there. And this one you can just do with a bit of eye. Just want to make sure that it's compressing about 20%. So there's a bit of compression there, enough that it's going to be engaged as we're riding along. If you need, I'm 80 kilos. If you're heavier than I am and you feel like as you sit on it, it's really compressed, you can just tighten this so it can get quite tight. trick to make it easier is if you just take the weight off the bike, then this will spin a lot easier. And if it's still compressing too far, then you can put a spanner or a ratchet on there and really tighten it up. But for me, you don't need to. You want all your suspension always to be engaged and compressed as you're riding along. So that's all done. Next, we're going to just do the rebound. Same as the front little red dial. I'm just going to go all the way to one end. I'm going clockwise. So I've gone fast. So it's way too fast. So gonna come back a couple of clicks. Come back 6 clicks. It's a little bit better. 2 more. So I've gone to 8 clicks from all the way. I find the rear one, the rear suspension, if it's too, if the rebound is too fast, you really feel it as you go over compressions in roads. So as you're riding along and there might be a dip in a road, or if you're on a fire trail and you go over like a water bar and the bike compresses, if the rebound is too fast, it really throws you up. It really bucks you off the seat and you can lose control very, very quickly. So having a slower rebound on the rear is quite good. So that's why I set mine quite slow. And then up the top here on the piggyback reservoir, we've got the preload again. So I'm just going to set this pretty much all the way at the soft. It's quite a heavy spring, this, so you want it to be able to engage. If I go all the way to the right, that's a heavy preload. But I'm going to go all the way to the soft end. And that's it. So the bike's going to feel a lot nicer now. All the little bumps in the road is going to soak up nice and easy. And if you do want to take it off-road and do some jumps and stuff, it should still be fine. As I said, if you want to send it, put a bit more air in the front forks, clamp down on that spring at the back, and you'll be good to go. Now, if you've had your bike, this is brand new, but all these parts do need to be serviced over time. So when you get to about 80 hours of riding, it's time to consider servicing your suspension. This is something that's generally done by an expert. And in Sydney, there's a place called Mountain Bike Suspension Centre, or there's a group up around Brisbane called Cyclinic, where you can post all your stuff in. At the moment, we don't have anything set up between the two, but stay tuned and we'll have a chat to the Mountain Bike Suspension Centre in how we can help you service these properly in the long run. Because there's oil and so many moving parts, they do wear down over time, and it's important to keep them well serviced so that they do operate how they're meant to. You notice on the suspension here we have these little guards. This is to protect the sanction here, or the stanchion. So this can get scratched, and you want to try and avoid scratches on that. So generally, just riding isn't going to cause a scratch. It's normally from falling over and the bike sliding along a rock or something. They're pretty hardened surfaces, so they are pretty robust. If you do scratch them, you want to stop riding relatively quickly and make sure that there's no burrs or anything on them, because as the suspension compresses over it, it will wreck all the O-rings and wreck everything inside the suspension here, and can become quite an expensive accident essentially. But you can get them fixed, and you can completely file them down and get them nice and smooth, and it aesthetically will look scratched, but it will be as good as new. So just keep an eye on that. And then if you are on really dusty roads and really muddy days, give it a hose, and you want to try and keep as much dirt out of these little O-rings in here as possible. Just a hose is fine. No, I wouldn't suggest a high pressure hose right up in there, but high pressure is generally fine.
All right, thank you, Thomas.
No worries, guys. If you've got any questions, just pop them in the comment section and I'll jump on the air and make sure we get back to you. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Awesome. See you next time. Cheers.
Hey, Oma! Yo!